Good morning, everybody, once again. Um, as he already laid it out, um, the bishop and I have talked many times about, what the role of a deacon is. And, me, first of all, coming into the church, I had no idea and no clue what a deacon did or even what his service was because I wasn't trying to deacon nothing. But here we are right now today. And and since he's already laid out the red carpet, I'm just going to walk on down it. Now, I was thinking about this for quite some time now. You know, I think about what was the last month? Yeah, Father's Day. He also opened up the door for many fathers. He opened it up and he began to uh, let the young minister start, and then another minister. After that, it was a little older, and then the pastors, each leader was able to give, each male leader was able to give a perspective on Father's Day. And then he also gave me a little slot then. So I've been thinking about it since then because I talked about my father. I talked about the fathers that are on these screens, and each and every one is very valuable and very worthy of bringing something about fatherhood. And then at the end, I mentioned Abraham, and I thought about him being the father of these nations, many nations, and I thought about the time he was called at 75, and this is kind of a continuum from where Bishop was last week, saying being led by the Lord. And I thought with that 25 years or 75 years when he was called to leave his country, and then a promise that would come from a son that he had not had yet. We know the time took 25 years, and so he was 100 years old when this happened, which is ridiculous anyway. And so I thought about it and I said, wow, 25 years. So as he talked about being led by God, I said, well, there's a process in there that I'm getting as I said that from last week to this week and even progressing back to Father's Day. There's something in waiting and trusting in the Lord. I said, wow, and you're being led by him. I said, there has to be some other elements in there. And so I was thinking about it and I said, I saw something. I saw that there's some waiting there. And Abraham waited along with his wife Sarai. And then I thought about just many different instances of the Bible where it talks about waiting. Right? There's a lot of waiting that's going on. I think in Isaiah, there's multiple scriptures. Isaiah talks about waiting on the Lord, and he talking about waiting on rain to come, and the promises of God being filled, and we're talking about things being held up, and the earth is even groaning and waiting for the sons of God. There's so many things about waiting. There's multiple things, but then I thought about David. I thought about King David, and King David, uh, he did some waiting too. And I'm going to start here, and I'm going to try to mesh this together where I started with Abraham, and I'm focusing now to King David when he was a youth. Now, when he was a youth, King David was told that he wasn't a king then. He was actually, as we know, I think when the story starts, uh, David's a young man at his father's house, Jesse, with his brothers, and there's God had a talk with Samuel, the prophet, to go find the king in Jesse's household. At the time, Saul was the king of Israel. They wanted a king, and that's what happened. But Saul did some things that kind of distanced himself from God, or caused a different direction. God said that I would begin to find another king, and it wound up being young King David, right? But David's now. Samuel the prophet is sent to Jesse's household to find his king, and his brothers are all lined up, I guess. And like I said, I'm going through the progression, and if you read stories, either Abraham and the story of David, they're kind of parallel. And they run kind of together. These guys I discovered have did some of the same things, some similarities in their story. David was then he was just tending the sheep at the time. Wasn't even, and I don't know if the word of the Lord had went through Samuel and he told Jesse on the pilgrimage there to get to where he was to even unfold the ideal that out of one of your sons there's going to be a king anointed here. I'm assuming none of them knew about it, but anyway, when prophet got there, he found the the sons of Jesse, lined them up. Some of them were tall, this, that height, and different shapes and sizes. You got different variations of his sons. And then he went through the progression looking for the one, and the one wasn't there. And so the question was asked, was that it? That's all the sons you got? Well, there's another one that I guess wasn't invited to the the inauguration there, out in the field or sheeping around with the sheep. They ain't even thinking about none of that stuff that they doing. So I'm gonna leave it right there. Now I'm gonna read the scripture that I wanna I want to extract from. I want to get the information from. I want to lay it out and then give you the reason and why I'm talking about waiting and trusting in the Lord. Now, now David at that time when he was probably tending the sheep, which you get different you can get different information. I don't think they were really settled on exactly how old he was. Some range from 10 years old all the way up to maybe 15 to 16. I'm going to just say he was around 15 years old when he was out there hanging out with the sheep because he ain't thinking about being no king. But I am going to go to the scripture here to set this up. 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. I don't have anybody to read like our illustrious Pastor Hines would always call on somebody else. So I'm just going to read. Bear with me. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also, in time past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. Therefore, all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years in Hebron. He reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. Now, in that text there, you got a few things going on. Talked about the tribes. It talked about David at Hebron. It talked about him being a shepherd, which that's where I started with. He's now shepherding over Lord's people as he started as a sheep shepherd, shepherding the sheep, lording over the sheep or tending the sheep in the flock. So the progression that I'm looking at now is David is now this king, and they're talking about the years that he ruled and he reigned over Judah and then over all of Israel. I discovered in this time from 15 years old until this time now, there was approximately about a 22 and a half year progression going on here. I found out that David was anointed 3 different times before he became king over all of Israel. And I thought 22 years of waiting on the Lord. When the Lord had actually sent the prophet to anoint him at 15. Now, at that time in the story, when he first got anointed by Samuel in front of his brothers, and that was kind of like a private inauguration, just his family and his brothers and his father. And those were the only ones who seen it. Nobody else knew about it other than God and Samuel and his family. So David, at that time, I'm just thinking he went back out to the sheep because at that time in the story, which we first got introduced to him, we had no idea of the progression or the things that were taking place in David's life because we didn't know anything. It was the first time. But now as I progress to this chapter here, we know that 33 years, 22 and a half years later, he became this king that he was told he was going to be at 15. Now we didn't know that at that time that he was going to have to. There's some. Let me back up and slow it down. There's some things that go on when you're waiting on the Lord that you may not be privy to. We've heard it said before, and then know this that this type of message has been preached many times about waiting on the Lord. But I was thinking a little bit more deeply into this and think, man, this is really some serious time, especially when you've been told And anybody knows about kings, if you're going to be a king, you're going to be ruler over people and nation. You get to make all the decisions. But at 15, David was more thinking about the sheep. And at the time, he didn't know David was fighting bears and lions. And later on, as you read the story, if you read the whole story of the life of David, it's some very interesting things going on there. After the defeating of the lion and the bear, and he had to fight a giant too. I mean, this is the time that he had to get to until he became this king. Now, also, David being a man of war, he's constantly probably being chased. No, not probably. We know it. He's being chased by enemies. He's being lied on. If you ever read the story, you know one time David had to act insane, crazy. Now, this is supposed to be a king that was anointed at 15, but yet he's going through all this stuff. And you know what? When we go through a time period waiting on God, he, it's been said that God he just don't give you all the details. Going back to Abraham's story, he told him to leave. He said, I got a place where I'm going to take you to. He didn't give him any details behind that. Now, going back and forth through those two stories, I saw, well, Abraham had some war in him too. He actually had to go rescue Lot after Lot got took away in captivity. He had to get his men together, go save his nephew, kick some butt, free him up, and bring him back. And I thought, wow, this is quite a bit. Now, this was a promise of a man who was going to be the father of many nations, who had no child at the time. And even his progression and him waiting, I seen Abraham even have thoughts and ideas about, what is this going to look like when I become this father of many nations? Even to the point, as you progress in his story, he even asked God one time. He said, "Well, wait a minute, how is this going to happen? I don't even got no children. I got to give it to my one of my heirs, right? This doesn't even make sense. So I really won't be the father of this nation. There are these nations that you're talking about." And here's David going through his dilemmas. Like I said, we found out one time in the story of David. As like I said, I don't have the time to give you every detail of every part of the story, but I'm trying to paint this picture of time waiting. King anointed at 15. Once again, took 22 and a half years to get there. Like I said, the man was a man of war, always seemed to be in trouble at some time and point. I mean, even to the point where they said that David was basically, and his men were hiding in a cave, right? Fugitives, running for their lives. And yet, I'm going to be king one day. I didn't figure all this stuff was going to go down like this. It probably had I'd have known that at 15 and he told me all this stuff was going to happen, I probably would have told Samuel, go, yeah, pass on by, and or either give it to one of my brothers, because that time that it took for him to progress into this man, into this king, God is doing some things. God moves people. God puts things in position that we don't see and we don't know about. He begins to make moves on our behalf to help us along the way. Um, David even had the opportunity to seize the moment from one of his, and like I said, was I don't know if it was one of his chief guys that were in the war with him that saw the opportunity to kill Saul and then began to rule at that time as king. But David saw that there was anointing that God had given this king, and he said, "Be it from me that I kill God's anointed one." In other words, that time could have come sooner had David intervened, and who knows? Who knows what the story would have been like then? Maybe David wouldn't have had the character that he had after waiting on God to do it God's way. Because what David seen also is the opportunity to bring the kingdoms together, but that actually, or actually, because the kingdoms were divided, some were still following Saul, some were following David. This was an opportunity for David by saying, if I continue to submit to this king, then the nations that are being divided, I have this great opportunity to bring them together, to show what instead of divide and conquer looks like, show everyone what love and togetherness, by showing respect to this king and not doing what voices on the outside say. See, because I know in our time of waiting, there's a lot of voices that can get us in trouble. David chose not to listen to the voices. And I thought about Abraham too. There was a time when Abraham he was in the same position where he was fighting with other kings to get Lot back. And once he got Lot back, one of the kings, and like I said, read the story to tell you his name. It might have been Ahaz or one of them guys, but they were like, "Oh, you did good, Abraham. Now what I need you to do is to basically take this stuff that you've gotten in, and I'm giving it to you as a gift." And Abraham basically told him, he said, "Look, I'm going to say it just like I'm going to say it. I ain't kissing your butt. I got other stuff to do. I'm going to become a father of many nations. You can keep your stuff. Matter of fact, I can give it to my guys that help me fight, and you can give them some of the spoil and plunder. But as far as for me, I don't want none of it. I don't want no part of it, because see, then I'll start thinking that it was you who done something instead of God." So Abraham and these guys, Abraham and David, they had insight. They disciplined themselves. There's benefits that come from waiting on God, and as we see this story being progressed upon in both instances, these Abraham and David both benefited greatly from waiting on the Lord. Like I said, you David was able to discipline himself from not listening to the outside noises and outside voices. He also um, found himself being able to embrace a truth that God was indeed a deliverer and a healer. He experienced those things in his quest to become a king and waiting. Now, I think about some of the things that we do when we wait, and it's very simple. I mean, I can be in the store and just in a line, and I can't even wait for the line to end. Set your hurry to get to that next place and progression of where we want to go. That waiting in the line at the grocery store causes me to 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 take control and get out of here sooner. So much so that I anticipate sometimes, if the line is long, that there's going to be another cashier coming, and I'll get over there before that next person, so I can get out of here sooner instead of waiting. And I know that's a different type of waiting. You got different variations of waiting, but what I'm talking about is when you wait for God. There's some results and there's some things that happen. There's some developing that takes place. There's some maturity that comes into the process. There's the understanding of really what even went on here between these stories is redemption and restoration even taking place. I mean, Abraham and Sarai, especially Sarai, she even questioned the ideal at 90 years old that she would have a child, even to the point of so much she laughed. And yet, that 25 years, they seen many things happen. They waited on God. As a matter of fact, Abraham was even challenged to the beauty of his wife Sarah. So when they went somewhere, and as they were on their journey to get to this land that God had promised him and her, he would even tell his wife, he said, "Now look, when we get in here," he said, "because of your beauty, I need you to tell them that you're my sister." And in doing that, we can discover that many times that God is, like I said, moving people out of the way and putting them in position to where even these men that saw the beauty of Sarah, God would even come to them and speak to them in a dream and tell them, "Hey, basically, you better not touch this one, because she's the one who's going to bring that promise." And to the point where the guys the next morning would ask Abraham. He said, "Well, why would you put me in this position, and have this happen to me?" But Abraham didn't know that on his journey that he was going to run into these people, and he somewhat was he feared his life. So the best thing Abraham could do was to come up with this plan and this ideal to say, "Well, this is my sister, to spare his life." only to find out God was the one who was making the provisions for him the whole time to become this father of many nations. And in Abraham's experience too, there was a relationship, a rapport with God that was impeccable. To the so much to the point to where, Abraham would have a debate with God. I thought, well, that's interesting. Because at the time when he wanted to go down and take over the city and destroy the city, Abraham decided that, I'm gonna on the behalf of Sodom, I'm going to be their go between guy. I'm going to be the one who's going to have a debate with God about not taking and wiping these guys out. So he even started off to asking God, would you do this if only it for wipe out the whole city for wicked men if there were 50 righteous? Be it not you, God, that would do that. So I know that's not the type of guy that you are. You're not that type of guy. So Abraham walked the progression down all the way to 10, and God continued this debate back and forth with Abraham until the time when Abraham said, God said, yeah, even if you find 10 righteous men, said, even at that point, he said, I won't destroy the city. Well, we know that in the story that it was destroyed. So can only go by that there was not 10 righteous men, but there was a relationship there in that time that Abraham's promise was coming from the time when he left his home until he got to these different stages and points in his life of making a relationship with God. God sometimes in that time of waiting wants to build this right relationship with us, a real relationship where we can have dialogue and we can talk to him about things and he wants to hear from us. Now I know waiting is tough sometimes because I'm in the process of waiting on some things right now. And when we wait, it seems like God is doing what he has done many times, get silent on us. We think maybe he's forgotten us. Maybe he's forsaken us. Abraham and David could have thought that very same thing, but they continued the course. They continued to do what God had called them to do. The distractions that were around, they didn't pay attention to them. They kept on course and they maintained not only their character and their integrity, but they sought God in the time of doing it. And I thought, what an amazing story of waiting on God that these two men displayed, even to the point where when distractions and voices on the outside could get them in trouble, they stayed the course. In Daystart, I want to share this real quick. This week, one of our community participants, she shared a story, Raspy Laura, and she talked about, and I'm driving, so I don't hear everything all the time because I got to keep my eyes on the road, make sure I'm paying attention, but I hear enough. She made reference to her health. And I know we all have health challenges. I got my young brother on here now who's dealing with some recent health challenges. And even Pastor Steve, we've learned he's dealing with something. But glory be to God that God is, like I said, he is a healer. He really does heal. So, but she shared about her health concerns that she's going through, and then she said it's been going on for some time. And of course, when you're dealing with stuff like that, you involve other people and you tell them things, especially when your loved ones are close to you. You want to share with them. And of course, immediately people want to help. They want to give advice. They do. And that's only common. And so she even began to express how um, I guess how concerned she became that not only was she hearing all these voices and she's going to different doctors, she began to Google some things. And of course, our good bishop said, "Well, be careful of Doctor Google; he'll get you in trouble." Right? So in that though, what she's learning and what she shared with us in her testimony is that she's learning to lean on God, to really wait on God, to hear from God, and that was the encouragement from the bishop too. And so I thought about that, and I thought like, wow, we sometimes will be, as I used the word distracted before, but you can also um, get yourself not only off course, but there's another word I'm looking for that I can't find now. I'll come back to it if I can. But anyway, you can get yourself sidetracked so much that you will believe and start to hear other voices, start to try other things, and get yourself off of God, and you be into this whirlwind. Now, if you've ever seen the Looney Tunes cartoon and you've ever seen this Tasmanian devil spin himself around, you get yourself so caught up in hearing all this different stuff, you'll be spinning like the Tasmanian devil, you won't know where you are. But when you wait on the Lord, when you hear his direction, when you have rapport with him, when you've spent time with him, when you know that there's hope that God has for you, when you know that there's a plan that he's put out there way before any other man, when you know that there's a place that you can rely on where there's safety, where there's where there's where there's trust, then you can go, or you can sidestep the distractions and make sure that the Lord is speaking to you. And it doesn't matter about time. Now, see, I've talked about 25 years with Abraham, 22 and a half years with David, and here we are in our very own lives right now, where we sit in our living rooms or on our decks and wherever we are. As we look at Eric, he's driving right now from country to country. No matter where we are right now today, we're waiting to do something, or waiting to get somewhere, or waiting to see an outcome of a situation. But I can tell you this much: when you wait on God and you put him priority and you see him moving and you see God doing what he can do, that only God can do, it settles your psyche. It settles your understanding of who he is. It lets you know that no matter the time, the day, the distance, he's right there. And so my whole thing here is to just encourage us on our waiting, because I know it can be frustrating. Like I said, I've been in those situations where I've had to wait. I understand that waiting can be painful. It can be frustrating. It can get you off your game. And even this, David, man, I just think about this guy all the time, because he went through a lot and he did a lot. And when David was going through this time, when we look at, in the Psalms, they got a lot of, in the Psalms, there's scripture reference about waiting on God a lot. And David wrote a lot of the Psalms, right? So we got to think now, when he became king after 22 and a half years, I'm thinking, is that when he sat down and wrote his Psalms? I got an inkling that when he was going through stuff, running and acting crazy and having to fight consistently, I have an inkling that David was sitting down at those times, at that particular time, writing the Psalms and thinking about the Lord. Oh, you've saved me again. You've kept me from my enemies. You've poised me up. You've given me strength. All those Psalms that he was talking about, he was experiencing it right then and right now. I'm not a good journalist. I don't journal a lot, but I take it that David did on his journey to get to where he was as being the king and the ruler over Judah. He had to do some journaling. And then this is why we now have the benefit, because there's some benefits from waiting on God. We have the benefit of reading all these illustrious Psalms that David wrote, pouring out his heart to God. It's because of the result of that. Now, I'm going to get out the way here in a minute, but I do want to say some things. Um, I thought about also where we're going, as Pastor Jeremy mentioned at the beginning, what we're doing this weekend, right? And so this led me to the time too. Bishop Nolan and his lovely wife, Pastor G, as I call her, heard God's voice 27 years ago to start a church. Now, if you've been around long enough, you know that he talks about, as a youth like David, God began to, or he was involved in church at I think like age 16. So the journey's been since 16. Now, had he known all that was going to take to get to this point now, who knows? But that's why God don't give us the details. See, that's exactly why. So, but we have this 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 amazing man who decided to follow God. And the result of it, see, there's benefits in it. And the result of it, here we are now, even after this pandemic, we're looking at each other in these boxes, and we've spread out tremendously. We've always been known as an international ministry, right? But now we got people who have moved into other states. And because of where we are, him hearing the vision of God, of if knowing not to be afraid to step out and do something different, we're benefiting from this now. Looking over at Herman and Marjorieville over in Atlanta, Washington's, Bev and Ned, South Carolina, right? I don't know. I hope Dr. Reblu, I don't know if he's still out of the States, but he's probably back now from where he was because I didn't know he traveled. But if he is, he's there somewhere in his homeland. But who knows? But we got people all over. I know I got some family members because of my lovely wife decided to let some people know. I think my brother, even from St. Louis, is chiming in for the first time, which is lovely. But we have this ability now because he seen or followed and stayed the course through 27 years of ministry to decide to make a hard right when God said, make a hard right. You have to know how to wait on God to do something like that. You really do. And so I thought about it this weekend. I said, well, wait a minute. And you know, and I know we talk about Bishop Nolan a lot because he's a great man of God, and I think that we got a subtle, sober-minded bishop instead of somebody running us off crazy, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But then you have his lovely wife in the background who's very quiet, but she's very strong. She's poised, very strong, y'all. Now she's just like the mamas that would be mamas when the babies. She's always got the band-aids in case the babies get hurt. She want to patch up the band, give them the band-aids and patch them up when they hurt. Don't say very much, but always there. But always reminding this leader that we have. And like I said, remember I reminded you about or if I didn't, Abraham became this awesome leader by letting, even when him and Lot was on their journey together, he had enough sense with leadership to say, here, you go over here and take this, and I'll take over here. So a leader knows how to give direction and vision without causing division. So here now I'm coming back to this story, and I'm gonna be ending here real soon. But I gotta say this, that here's this lady behind the scene, Pastor G, telling him, she said, now always remember, you got to take it easy on the babies. He says this all the time. He said, you can't give them too much. You know, babies need to be burped. Babies need to be clean. But mama's the one who's concerned about the babies, telling Papa how to go out there and give the message and nurture the babies or grow the babies up and teach the babies, but teach the babies the right way so they'll get it. So 27 years of ministry. There's an anticipation that I've heard him talk about. He said, I can't wait. You know, I can't wait till this day comes. So we have this because there's 27 years of him doing some work. He's been working and doing this thing. Now he's starting to see some fruit come from this. So he's anticipating these people coming from all over the country now that have tuned in to the Journey Center Global and getting some truth. And now he's starting to see some dividends, starting to hit pay dirt. So he's excited. He says, I can't wait. And that's what I'm talking about. Now, yeah, we get to that point where he can't wait. And I can see that. I understand why he can't wait. Because he's saying, wait a minute, there's some stuff going on here that God's doing. And we've been priming this pump for 27 years, and now we starting to see it. We starting to see pay dirt. We starting to see some production out of this thing. You know, you get in there and you let God do what he do. God will begin to show you some fruit. Fruit is fruit, y'all. That's just all I know. Fruit is fruit. And when you get the right fruit waiting on God, God will show you how to be a fruit checker. You start to learn how to check some fruit. And that's good. Now when you're in there long enough and you checking fruit like uh, uh, David and Abraham, you're checking fruit. You're looking at all these characters that are also in this story. They checking their fruit the whole time they're there. And when you let God do what he's doing, just like I gave you the illustration of Pastor G and Bishop, and then all of us who are benefiting from this, you get to checking some fruit, you'll find out, wait a minute, there's some stuff going on with this fruit in that process of waiting. You know, you go to Galatians, you'll look and say, oh man, there's some patience with that fruit. You got to have some patience to wait that long, right? There's some patience down there in that fruit. Also, there might be some long suffering that went on in there. Yeah, you got some long suffering. And so there's a lot of things that's going on. Now I'm gonna end this thing, and I know I've said it a couple of times. You just gotta have hope. You got to keep your faith. You got to practice discipline. You got to trust when you're waiting in the Lord. Those two are like cousins, right? Trust and waiting, they're like cousins. Same type of thing. Now, talked about the anticipation. I'm going to date myself one more time, like the Looney Tunes cartoon. And I thought of this. I said, there was a commercial back in the 70s, and most of y'all might know. Some of y'all young ones may not know, but that's all right. Bottle of Heinz ketchup. No, not like Pastor Deb and Pastor Steve, Hines. It's Heinz. Well, this young kid, my illustration or my remembrance of it was the young kid having a nice hamburger and fries. He's about to dive in on lunch or either dinner, right? And so you got this bottle of ketchup that the Heinz ketchup used to come in, and he turns it upside down. And the ketchup's so thick back then, it don't even want to come out. And then in the background, the marketers or whoever sings the song slightly, anticipation, anticipation, it's making me wait. Now, that ketchup dribbles out of the bottle, hits the burger, hits the fries. And oh my God, that anticipation of waiting. By the time that red, succulent ketchup hits that burger and he bites into it, the anticipation of waiting. It's so sweet. It is so sweet when we wait on God like that, when we can anticipate Him showing up and doing what He does. It'd be just like that Heinz ketchup hitting that burger and fries. Sweeter than bear meat, as he would say.